So our second guest, Sinclair Gore. Some of you, I know, have experienced Oxford Lymphoedema Practice in, obviously, Oxford. Sinclair was due to play golf with us today, but found that saving lives and operating his cancer clinic today was obviously more important than getting his 7-iron out. So thank you for coming along this evening and joining us in your busy schedule, Sinclair. Sinclair joined OLP in 2015 as a plastic surgeon with specialist interests in lymphedema, and that's what we're going to hear more about, surgeries involved with lymphedema, and I know a few of you have experienced this already. So without further ado, ladies and gents, Sinclair Gore.
Right, well, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you to Matt for asking me to come along. It's a pleasure to come on this beautiful day. I'm sorry I didn't get to join you in the golf this morning. The whole cancer thing sounds very noble. The fact is I only took up golf 2 years ago, and after a wedding and stag weekend event last September in Ireland, I vowed I needed a winter with my driver, and didn't get the winter and spring with my driver. So I thought today I'm just not going to perform. So unfortunately, cancer came top. Being asked to talk without PowerPoint to a surgeon is like losing a limb or something. So hopefully my oratorial skills will get me through. Normally I'm graphs and pictures and all this stuff. So I was forbidden that today. Matt asked me to talk about the various surgery things, which is a bit dry, and we'll get to that eventually. You may say, what is a plastic surgeon doing up here? And of course, plastic surgery is a very broad church. There's lots of different bits of plastic surgery. Some you know about from the popular press, some you don't. And the microsurgical end of plastics is how I got into this. And Dominic and Alex, who are the other two surgeons in Oxford that I work with, basically approached me. I remember the morning very well. They approached me and said they needed a third pair of hands because things were getting busy. And at that time, I was aware they were getting up to this. But prior to that, my plastic surgery training, lymphedema was this weird niche thing that really was a bit difficult and a bit hard. No one really did it. My first exposure to knowing about the modern era of it was at a training course up in Scotland, where I became aware of some of the published literature from Japan and Italy that was really very impressive. One of my good friends was a cardiac surgeon. I was chatting to him about it on a weekend away. And his memory, of course, of lymphedema surgery was from St. Thomas's Hospital in London, where it was the grim old barbaric stuff where you're flensing limbs and horrible skin grafts and stuff leaking everywhere, and really stuff that we don't do anymore. So there is a modern world, and there's a modern world that has been popularized by the global giants, you know, Kushima from Japan, Campisi from Italy, Hakan Borsen from Sweden. And we've been very fortunate to travel to all these individuals and all these people and learn all the tricks. And they say in surgery, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything's been done sometime before. But of course, you know, wind back 60 years, no one had done this kind of surgery. So it has become new over the last number of decades and popularized over the last 20 to 25 years for sure. Comparing the old and the new is like chalk and cheese. And the old surgeries were all about sort of elephantiasis, huge limbs, which is what everyone Googles and finds out about and hates and is terrified about. And of course, they all, in the modern era, want to live well with their lymphedema and minimize the risk of progression and so on and so on. So just very briefly, many of you will know much about the surgery and the various types of things that are involved. It's not for everybody, and unfortunately, it's not a cure. And many of you will understand the difference between primary lymphedema and secondary lymphedema. Primary lymphedema, where you fall into this through no fault of your own, but it's one of the variables in life that we all have. And it's generally kind of poorly understood. Now, Peter may pick me up on that because I'm sure he knows a bit more about it than anybody else. But whilst there are some syndromes that you can ascribe to that, there are a lot of people who just get it through bad luck. And those are hard to treat, actually. It's the secondary lymphedema that people get after their cancer treatment that people find so punishing. And particularly in this country, where I think NHS cancer care is often very good. My NHS life is principally in head and neck cancer and skin cancer, and I'm proud of the service that we offer, and I think we give patients a very good deal. But when patients get lymphedema after their cancer treatment, they feel a bit cheated, especially since the NHS provision for services is limited. I do think that if all this fancy new modern 20-year-old surgery was available in 97 when Tony Blair came into power and was throwing money at the NHS, I'm sure much of this would be standard of care. But it wasn't, didn't exist then. Things have changed. And you've probably only seen on the news just this morning a report that the NHS is struggling to deliver everyday basic cancer care. So cancer and trauma are, you know, the big hitters, the headlines. And if we're struggling with those, then I think we are in real trouble. And that explains why there is so little resource around the edges for all the other things. Like everything, particularly in the cancer secondary work, prevention is always better than the cure. And Dom and I were off at a breast cancer conference in Belfast just a couple of weeks ago, where Dom was giving one of the keynote lectures about the lymphedema end of breast cancer treatment. And the overriding theme from that for us is that whilst the lymphedema treatments can be as good as you can make them, actually, of course, if you can alter the disease management to result in less lymphedema, that's really where it's at. And there's a huge drive in breast cancer treatment to reduce the burden of treatment that might go on to lead to arm lymphedema, which is very exciting. And it's really the start of that era, because all since the 30 years since I've been at med school, you know, the treatment has been, you know, very, very much the same in terms of the surgery. So that's very exciting. I think the other thing from that conference, just as a group of breast cancer surgeons and physicians, was that there is a much greater awareness of lymphedema and a much greater awareness of it being a potential problem that's a really big problem that a lot of people, you know, will say is worse than the cancer itself. I think it's very hard for those of us who haven't had cancer or haven't had lymphedema to really compute that. But we do hear this all the time. So I think the awareness of lymphedema is dramatically improving. And going along with prevention being better than the cure, there is no doubt that the surgical treatments are, the reconstructive treatments are better if you get people early. Because at the end of the day, the lymphatic system is an active pumping system. And once it gives up, you can do all these joints all you like, but it won't help it work. Is Paolo Mascagni, who's an anatomist in Florence in the 17 and 1800s, was the first person to popularize the anatomy and physiological systems of the lymphatics, really. And in that sense, we've moved on in terms of being able to diagnose, you know, how to see it. And Jane's presentation about, you know, for ICG mapping and so on is what we use within our surgery to do the same thing. But the processes of actually treating it once it's there and established is still very, very difficult indeed. Matt wanted me to mention the surgery we get up to. The majority of stuff we do is the reconstructive side of the spectrum, trying to make what there is of you better. But the problem is there's a point where patients who come with lymphedema have degraded to a point whereby they can't be made much better. So it's all about trying to get people early. And the commonest thing we do is join lymphatics to veins under the microscope. And whilst you may think that's very fancy and very technically demanding and so on, it's nothing compared to golf. That is my experience of golf. So I would welcome any of you to come to our microsurgical operating any day and give it a go. Because you'll have more success than I have out there. There are some other reconstructive operations which we've dabbled in. We don't have as much confidence in. They're much bigger operations, and the conversations that you have with patients about, you know, what is it worth putting yourself through? What risk is it worth taking for the sake of what some people might claim marginal gain, but for what other patients claim to be a game changer? It's very difficult. The other thing is, because as Alex would say, some of it's unpredictably unpredictable, and it's often hard to know. So for us, a lot of it is about picking the winners and we only operate on a third of the patients we see because we don't feel it's right to be offering operations to people who are very unlikely to benefit. So the goal is to find more ways to treat those 2/3 who aren't suitable for these techniques. There you go. Nothing very exciting or amazing. Again, if I could be as good at golf as I have gotten to be as good at lymphedema, and that's the most surgery, that would be a winner. If you get any questions, I'm very happy to take any questions later on.
Fantastic. Any questions that you have now whilst Sinclair is there?
Can I just start? I was one of your patients just 2 years ago now.
Right.
I would be surgery, so hopefully I was there. I was just wondering whether lymph node transfer is one of those that you were talking about just now or alluding to, and maybe something that's good also. And at the moment, but good things are okay.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so without wanting to get too boring or intense about it, lymph node transfer is purported as another of the reconstruction techniques where you take a block of lymphatic containing tissue, move it around the body as what's called free flap, where you disconnect it, plumb it in under an arterial vein. It survives where you put it, but it has a lymphatic draining function where you put it. Now that is steeped in mystery and sort of sparkle dust. And it's hard to imagine how that actually works. And like anything in life or anything in surgery, if you really want to believe something, you can find some scientific evidence somewhere to support that view. But does it actually work in our hands? We've had some very good results in the small numbers we've done, but it also generates problems. And the big problem for the lymphedema community, if you're going to take a block of lymphatic containing tissue from somewhere, well, is that going to leave lymphedema where you take it from? And nobody wants to sign up for that at all. So we've done operations from the neck, because I'm a head and neck surgeon. So taking stuff out of the neck is actually fairly straightforward for me and has got a negligible risk of that. So that's okay. Or taking it from inside the tummy. And suddenly you get into big operations. And we spent time with Joe Dyan in New York. We put people into pancreatitis doing these operations. And he's just published some very impressive stuff from New York. But I think a good LVA is probably as good as a good lymph node transfer. And LVA is so much lower risk to the patient. That's the thing. So we would normally start at that because we're risk averse. The other thing is that in the North America, you don't get paid on insurance for LVAs, but you do get paid for a free flap. So funny old thing, money talks. And the US literature is dominated by lymph node transfer, as it is in Taiwan and various other places. And it's so hard to see through the smoke, and see around the mirrors, to work out the difference between the two. So we consider them of equal power. And I think somebody who's going to benefit from one is probably going to benefit from the other.
Well, thank you very much indeed.
And I understand